what are we at? 26. Good morning, good afternoon, I guess. It's 12 o'clock, everyone. We do have a big number expected, about 200 people. So thanks for showing up for our webinar on stabilizing plastics markets. I'm Jennifer Kuhl. I'm the Executive Director of the Recycling Council of Alberta. And the panelists will be introducing themselves, but we're excited to have them joining us as well. So people will be coming in, but we only have an hour with you, and I think we've got a lot to cover. So we're gonna get started right on the hour. Now, see if I can. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement, and of course, everyone is coming to us from a different place, but we will use the RCA's land acknowledgement. So the RCA resides on Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories within Alberta. We respectfully acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting, and we pledge to continue to protect it. So maybe just a note that I had dental work this morning and my mouth was frozen, and it's becoming a little bit unfrozen right now. But if you think I'm speaking weird, I apologize, and this is why. But a bit about the Recycling Council of Alberta. We are a nonprofit with about 350 members that kind of span the recycling value chain, but expanding even further into other parts of the circular economy world and all the other R's like reuse, rethinking, remanufacturing, repurposing, etc. And as an organization, we have a vision for a waste-free world, and we have a mission to advance the circular economy in Alberta. So thanks to everyone who is a member that's on this call. So a few housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded, as you probably saw when you came in, and it will be available if you have to drop off or if there's those who are unable to attend right now and are seeing this as a recording. It is being recorded for that purpose. And then because we are expecting quite a few people, feel free to turn your cameras off and keep your audio on mute, please, your microphone on mute. And then put any questions that you may have in the chat function, and we will monitor that and make sure that the speakers get that as timely as we can. And if we can't get to some, we'll work with the speakers offline to get those addressed. And we are happy that you're here for this webinar on stabilizing recycled plastic end markets. And we have a great lineup of panelists and a really great moderator as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Tammy right now to lead us through the day.
Thanks so much, Jen. And thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Tammy Swass. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Plastics Recycling Association. Sorry, one second. I'm just going to move you back here so I can see everyone again. And APRA helps to facilitate plastics recycling across the plastics value chain. And I just wanted to share this slide as a little bit of background about who I am and what APRA does, and happy to chat with any of you further about our organization after this call. So thanks again for joining me, and thanks to Jen and the APR for co-hosting with us on this, what I think is going to be a great discussion today. And so before I dive into today's discussion, we just wanted to spend a few minutes going through a little bit of grounding, a little bit of history into how plastics markets work, why they matter so much to the success of recycling and circular economy initiatives. And I see my role in this as helping you along, helping to understand topics, and asking thoughtful questions of the panelists to try to help answer your questions about plastics markets. So I just wanted to share, I'll share a little bit of a brief history before we dive into some of the discussion. And as Jen said, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring that as well. I also realize that there's probably some terminology that we're going to use. We love to use acronyms in this industry. And so I've shared a few of them here that we may use, some of the plastic acronyms that we may throw around in terms of referencing certain types of resins and plastics. And for those of you who haven't been as involved in this industry, there's a little bit more there for you as well. And so really, as we get into this discussion today, uh, it's important to understand that recycling is driven by economics. So when we look at different policy levers and tools such as extended producer responsibility, where the producers become responsible for managing materials at the end of their life and for that financial sustainability of those programs, that really still only gets us around halfway around the circle of that circularity. It helps us finance collection, it helps us work on those efficiencies and those systems and develop economies of scale. We still need that strong demand to drive the other half of that circular approach. And a lot of what we'll be discussing today is some of those tools and policies that our expert panelists have as suggestions of how we can use things such as recycled content mandates and other pieces to help drive that demand. And so over the years, we've seen this continual interplay and this kind of tug of war between two materials, virgin resin and post-consumer recycled content, or as we'll refer to it today as PCR. And so both materials are often competing for the same end use. So if you're a manufacturer of plastic items, you may have the option to use completely 100% virgin resin in your production, recycled content, or most likely, as you're starting to explore, you're using a combination of both. And because of this, the two markets are very closely connected. So historically, when resin prices rise, recycled content generally becomes more attractive economically. Manufacturers start to look to PCR as a way to manage costs while also meeting those sustainability goals. The challenge comes when virgin resin prices fall, as we've seen more recently, and I'll touch on that in a second. And first, I want to go back a few years, about 10 years, to talk a little bit about where we've come from in a recent history and to help set the context of where we're going here. So this period was defined by a growing awareness of plastics waste and ocean pollution. China's national sword policy officially came through in 2018 and really disrupted the global plastics scrap markets. It really forced those of us in North America and even in Europe to build more domestic processing capacity. 10 years ago, I could say, as a summary, recycled plastics were largely a waste management issue. And by the early 2020s, they had become a boardroom issue as companies looked at corporate sustainability initiatives. Then the pandemic hit, as we're all aware. There's further price volatility in the virgin markets. All at the same time, circular economy commitments are coming through. And federally, here in Canada, different policies along zero plastic waste goals were being advanced. We also saw the start of many extended producer responsibility programs in many provinces, including Alberta. And that was starting to help drive some of those commitments and those corporate brand commitments to using recycled content. Now, in the last couple years, we've seen periods where we've had increased supply of virgin plastics driven by low feedstock costs and expanded petrochemical productions. These have created a significant price gap between virgin resin and recycled material, with virgin resin being much more attractive and more cheap and readily available. Recycled content then has a much harder time competing. Oops, sorry, on the competing on the economic scale. And this isn't just a North American issue. So we've seen this across Europe. I just read an article yesterday about recyclers in Europe facing the same challenges and trying to work through approaches or options of how we can address this as a global society, as a global market. And so despite demand growing for sustainability, the economics and market actions by manufacturers can still strongly favor virgin materials. And adding to this complexity are the external factors that create uncertainty and volatility. So global events such as geopolitical tensions, wars, supply chain disruptions, and tariffs can all impact resin pricing, availability, and trade flows. We've seen market distortions caused by practices such as resin dumping, and you'll hear us and Elena will talk about this a little bit more, but this is where foreign manufacturers export plastic resins into market at prices that are lower or below fair market value. So this can undercut producers, disrupt market balance, and in the response to this, governments have sometimes stepped up with trade measures. So, for example, Canada has imposed anti dumping duties on PET resins imported from China and Pakistan in order to help protect the domestic industry and maintain fair competition. Against this backdrop, one of the most interesting development in recent years has actually been that shift in the relationship of virgin and recycled resin pricing. So for a period of time, recycled plastics appear to be following their own market path as opposed to the coupling that I mentioned earlier. This was driven largely by those sustainability commitments, recycled content targets, corporate ESG goals, and emerging regulations that helped create that separation. And it seemed recycled content was actually beginning to establish its own market value proposition. But more recently, that separation has narrowed, and again, these two markets are now closely coupled again. One market analyst described it as if a reset button had been pressed across the plastics sector. Today, recycled resin prices are once again highly correlated with virgin resin prices. So we see that when virgin resin prices increase, recycled resin prices tend to follow. When virgin resin prices soften, recycled markets often feel that pressure as well. And what's particularly interesting in this is that while recycled resin prices have moved upward alongside virgin resin, these prices aren't really being driven by stronger demand. So, in other words, prices may be increasing, but transaction volumes and actual consumption of recycled content has not increased at the same rate, which we'll touch on and a few of our panelists will talk about today as a challenge when you're trying to build that circular economy and trying to engage those groups in using recycled content. And it raises an important question. If recycled content is becoming more competitive relative to virgin resin, why aren't we seeing a corresponding surge in that demand? And so historically, when that virgin resin has reached price parity or become more expensive than recycled content, manufacturers would increase their use of that material whenever possible. The economics made that decision relatively straightforward. Today, the market's behaving differently. Many buyers remain cautious. They're balancing product specifications, performance requirements, operational risks, customer expectations, and supply reliability. So even when recycled content makes economic sense, companies are hesitant to make changes that would introduce uncertainty into their manufacturing processes. And as a result, the market's learning an important lesson. Price matters, but price alone doesn't drive market growth. Confidence matters, supply reliability matters, quality consistency matters, policy certainty matters, as we'll hear about today from some of the panelists, and customer demand matters. And so ultimately, the question facing the industry today is no longer simply whether that recycled resin can compete on price. The bigger question is around what conditions do we need to create as an industry, as a value chain coming together to discuss this challenge on what conditions we can create to make manufacturers feel confident enough to use recycled content at scale. And that's the challenge and the opportunity we'll be coming at with you today, and how we look at policy tools and market signals and that end market development strategy. We're really asking, how do we create those conditions that allow recycled materials to compete, grow and thrive in the long term to ultimately support the plastic circular economy. And so very happy to be joined by our expert panelists, Alan Langdon, the Chief Executive Officer of Circular Materials, Matt LeBrun, Director, Plastics Regulatory Affairs Division, Plastics and Waste Management Directorate at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Elena Mantagaris, a Senior Advisor for Canadian Initiatives with the Association of Plastics Recyclers. And all of them will be here to help us explore where we go, the different angles of industry, producers, government, and recyclers, and how we build a more resilient system. Before we dive into the first question that I have for the panel, I'll pass it over to Elena, who just has a couple more slides on helping us set the context for today's discussion.
Thank you, Tammy, and thanks for that great overview. So, Tammy really touched on many of the drivers that are affecting the recycled plastics at this point. So specifically, low price of virgin plastic. Now, I know we're all seeing increases in that virgin plastic as a result of the war in Iran, but this is a very temporary blip. And quite frankly, I think we'll all agree that policy should not be determined via war, or war is not a policy instrument itself, right? And it's not a strategy. So we are going to see, and we're expecting to see those virgin prices continue to go down again. We have an excess supply of virgin plastic that Tammy touched on. So we've got a flooding from within our own North American market of virgin plastic, where the changing trade practices have created some challenges in getting that material out over the last year. But we're also seeing an excess of material coming into Canada and North America and Europe in general from Asian countries. So that's number 4 here on the list. And as Tammy also noted, we're seeing brands themselves step back from the recycled content targets that they voluntarily set. The geopolitical conditions have shifted, and we can't ignore that. And so there's almost a, if you will, a permission to step back from previous commitments that were made to the environment. And we're seeing the impact of that in the plastics recycling sector. Next slide, please. Just to draw home these points through some visuals, this is just highlighting how brands have pulled back from those voluntary goals. And by the way, these are some leading companies, right? So this is not a shame game here that I'm trying to say. These are actually some of the companies that are trying really hard. And yet even they, when you look at their 2025 targets and their 2030 targets, are nowhere near meeting the goals that they set for themselves. And so if these leaders aren't meeting them, we can only imagine how it looks for the other sort of 10 companies that follow and the other 1,000 companies after that, right? And quite frankly, what we're seeing as a result of those low virgin prices that both Tammy and I mentioned is the fact that brand owners are just unwilling to put in place any orders for recycled content, and certainly not willing to put in long-term orders, what we call offtake agreements for that recycled resin. And so that means that recyclers are facing this enormous market risk. So Tammy mentioned that through EPR, we now have this fantastic collection system and sorting system that's rolling out across the country, and it lands at the recycler's door. But then the recycler processes it and doesn't have buyers at the back end. So the entire market system risk is now on the shoulders of recyclers because there aren't steady buyers for this material anymore. Next slide, please. We also talked about illegal dumping of PET, and Tammy highlighted a recent case where the Canada Border Services Agency, actually a complaint was brought forward by a company called Alpec. And they said, listen, there's illegal dumping of PET coming into Canada from China and Pakistan. And you see that if you look at from the left side of the slide, the green is Pakistan and the blue is China. And you see the enormous amount of material coming into Canada at prices and at market prices that were way below what you would normally expect to sell at if you had similar labor standards, if you had similar environmental standards, right? And other types of practices. When the CBSA did their investigation, they found there was dumping that took place and brought in place requirements for prices to now be equalized to the market in Canada. And so you suddenly see in June of 2025, the material drop off from China and Pakistan, but then what you see surging is material coming in from India in the red color that you see on this slide. And so what we're dealing with now is a bit of a whack-a-mole situation where this material is going from country to country, and whether it now can be deemed illegal dumping from India or simply unfair trade practices will be something a CBSA will have to determine. But what we're clearly seeing is countries that are availing themselves of raw material sources that for us are embargoed. So for example, oil will go from Russia to China. China will send that to India. So your raw material sources are now much cheaper, right? I'm not going to accuse India of this, but what we're increasingly seeing globally is the use of forced labor in some jurisdictions, right, which is causing great concern. And so, again, this is being reflected in prices from some countries and how they can sell in Canada. The other issue of concern about these practices is that some of these countries, again, the raw materials and other things are coming from elsewhere, but when they ship to Canada, it gets labeled as, in this case, let's just say India. But in fact, it may be origin washing, as we're calling it, and it may be going around sort of trade laws that we have for countries where there's supposed to be tariffs in place. And so this origin washing is now creating a lot of concern. And again, all of this material is coming in at incredibly low pricing, making it incredibly difficult for Canadian recycles to compete fairly on the market. Next slide, please.
Elena, sorry, there was a quick question
Yes.
for that other slide.
Yes.
If
Go back.
I noticed, yeah, it's in dollars. Do you have a sense of what that volume would be in tons of plastics dumping as opposed to just value?
Great question. I'd have to go back and pull up that data. But it is, I mean, we are talking, thousands and
Big
tens of
numbers.
thousands, if not big numbers. Exactly. This is not small numbers. There's high productions coming out of these countries. And for it to be having an impact goes to show that the volume is significant for a company like Alpec to have spent tens of millions of dollars to launch an investigation through the government of Canada, right, to get this addressed. It was having material impact on companies.
Okay, thanks.
And anyone who really wants to dig into these things, there are the HS codes up there that were on that previous slide. So those of you who have the time to dig in like that, I encourage you to do so. But all this to show you, what does that mean when we look at the impact on the recycling markets? What we're seeing in values of recycled resin is showcased on this slide. All of it is showing a decline. And again, I know in the last 3-4 months, we've seen a bump up, but this is not a permanent issue. And in fact, just this week, I was in a conversation where folks were saying that if there is a resolution to the situation in Iran, and there's going to be an increased flooding then of oil on the market and lowering of prices of oil, we're going to see potentially even lower prices for virgin resin in 2027. And therefore, the squeeze on recycled resin is going to be even worse. So as you see, HDPE down 34%, and that's natural. Color down 58%, PET clear 68%. These are significant decreases, making it untenable for recyclers. And what we've seen already in Europe is about a dozen recyclers have shut their doors. And in about 1 million, just in 2025, over 1 million tons of recycled resin has essentially been lost in terms of recycling capacity in Europe. And then in the US, in the last 12 odd months, we've had 6 recyclers close down just for PET recycling. And so for North America, we've now lost 25% of PET recycling capacity as a result of those closures. So significant impact being felt all over the place. That's it for my slides, Tammy.
Okay. Thanks so much, Elena. Appreciate that additional context. And just kind of diving in, sorry, rather, to our first kind of question. Maybe Elena, I'll bring it back to you. I know that APR just had recent member meetings and kind of that larger convening of recyclers from across North America. And can you just kind of share any comments, perspectives from your recycler members on the market situation, and yeah, just your perspectives and maybe some things you're looking at or looking to do.
Yeah, I mean, our members, given how they're struggling, they're looking for a lot of different measures to be introduced, as particularly from a policy perspective, right? So certainly in Canada, we're really hoping that the federal government will move forward with national recycle content regulations so that we can try and stabilize markets that way. But we know it takes time to put in place regulations like this. And so we're trying to look at some interim measures. Some interim measures might include things like a tax credit to stimulate the demand side so that brand owners actually purchase the recycled resin. And so what would that look like, if you will? Other things that we're looking at are actually requiring country of origin requirements for PCR use. So in any certification program where you have traceability of where does that resin come from, wanting to see more requirements to showcase that it's coming from North America and being used in packaging. So these are just a couple of examples. Obviously, we would love to see more action from CBSA on some of this dumping activity. The challenge is companies incur the cost to bring forward these complaints and all of the legal costs associated with it. So these are the same companies that are facing financial pressures that now have to essentially go to like a judiciary process that's a very expensive legal cost for them. So this is, I don't think we quite have the nimble tools in place that we need to address this type of unfair trade practices. And so the only blunt instrument left to us as a country in these circumstances is essentially tariffs. But then, you have to convince our country to put in place tariffs just at a moment in time when we're trying to diversify our trade relations, right? So we get there are a lot of push and pulls, but the squeeze on this sector, just at a time when we say we want circularity, we want to have capacities and capabilities in this country to recycle effectively and create a circular economy, we're now putting these very businesses at risk.
Thanks for that additional context and response. And I guess I wanted to pass it over to Alan now, just to, I guess, kind of add to anything that's been said so far. And Alan, I know you represent the producers from your members' perspectives. How do we kind of both buffer the storm of these external events to reduce those peaks and valleys, and also that sustainability for the long term? And what are some of the pieces that circular materials is advancing?
Yeah, so I think we're feeling the brunt of it as well. Obviously the way EPR is constructed, you know, we base our costs and our fees on not only how much it costs to run the system, but also, the revenue generated from the sale of the material also used to defer costs. And so we're definitely feeling the brunt and the impacts of sort of the softening market. It's particularly in PET, but flexibles as well. And so I think for us, I think the difference from where we were in the past, where municipalities were running the system, is we now have both an obligation as well as a regulatory requirement to really figure out solutions for these end markets. We have to ensure that we're able to meet the targets that have been established under provincial regulation, both in Alberta and Ontario specifically, as well as Nova Scotia. And so in doing so, we need to make sure that we're exploring every avenue possible, ensuring that we're able to stabilize these markets. So for us, I think we're really on a two-track approach right now. One is looking at the relationships and the partnerships we have domestically in Canada. Is there a way to extend and find ways to increase capacity domestically to be able to manage those materials? But then also that only solves part of the equation, which is that's great. We can ensure that we address the challenges we're seeing with recycling capacity in North America. That's job number one. Job number two is demand. How can we increase demand? Because we can have this material recycled, but if no one's buying that recycled material, we haven't really solved the problem. And so, like Elena, I think we're interested in working with our producers and certainly have a range of discussions and initiatives we're exploring on how can we increase the demand. Certainly, we think there would be a role for the federal government, and certainly if there was something like a tax credit would help bridge that gap and bring people to the table. I really think at this juncture, given all the costs that producers are trying to balance in terms of the general inflation cycle, as well as all of the extraneous costs and complication that have come up as a result of the tariff situation and just general trade dislocation. I think really what we're looking for is more of a carrot at this juncture. There are companies that are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to increase the use of recycled content. And so is there a way of establishing more of an incentive than a punitive system at this juncture to reward those companies that are ready to move ahead and hopefully provide a template for other companies in their ability to incorporate the use of recycled content.
Yeah, and that's I think that segues nicely into kind of an opportunity, Matt, for you to speak on federally. What areas would you say you're looking at in order to be part of this solution, and yeah, some of the pieces on your side? Oh no, I think Matt might have frozen. He's been waiting so patiently to talk.
The best laid
Everyone else,
plans.
Everyone else is still there, correct? Okay, perfect. We will give him a second to hopefully jump back in and be able to reload and get him sorted out. We were just saying earlier, always some technical difficulties, but
Oh, there we
we
go.
oh,
I think he's
Okay.
back.
Of
thanks.
course, it's right in the moment of a transitioner to speak that, of course, the internet connection
Yeah, right.
isn't
Of
stable.
course. Yeah. Over
All
to you, Matt.
technology. Thank you. So yeah, just to take it to the federal level, I mean, the government's well aware, been raised by many stakeholders, the current issues impacting the recycling sector. The volatility in virgin resin prices, the weekend markets, the increased competition from low-cost imports, the dumping issues. So federally, we've really been taking a look at what has been done in the past. So there was a proposal issued back in 2023, but many of the targets were a bit too ambitious too quickly without really considering how this could be implemented feasibly. And so what the federal government has done is like I mentioned, take a step back, start to reconsider what recycled content policy looks like moving forward. We've had some engagement via a workshop we did in February of this year, but I think there's a little bit more engagement to have that is going to be upcoming probably by the end of this year or early next year, really to set the stage for what the federal role can look like in terms of recycled content, as well as stabilizing the plastics end markets. I think it's been made clear to us that the feds have a significant role here. There needs to be that national defragmentation to make sure that that stability is more guaranteed and more consistent, really to help support all of you and to take all of this important work that the PTs have put in place with their EPR programs to generate the plastics that can then be used and sold to end markets. Kind of from a broader national level. So we definitely do see a role. A lot of folks have talked about recycled content mandates. That is probably one of the most effective tools to get us where recyclers need to go to create that stability in end markets. But as per always, regulation comes with the need for consultation, engagement. We really want to make sure we get it right because as Elena and others have mentioned in the past to me, and what I've seen in the news, you see that these recyclers are not, even with sometimes with recycled content mandates, do not weather the storm in other countries. And so the goal really is to make sure that we get it right, that we get the feedback from all our PT counterparts to make sure that we understand like what is the crux of what is needed, how do we avoid some of the pitfalls that are going on internationally, and then how do we stabilize things for Canada to really improve that market. So I think at this stage, I mean, we'll get into it in future questions, but like one of the things I've been saying to stakeholders is that if recycled content mandates are one of the key factors to help stabilize, now is the time to make noise. We're really, as a government at the federal level, looking to set our agenda for what plastics can look like into the future. Make it known that this is something you need to help stabilize your markets. And I think that you have a very, very receptive government right now to any stakeholder feedback on the direction of where it could go.
Thanks. And yeah, I think industry as a whole really appreciates the work that you're putting into getting that recycled content mandate piece right. And I mean, it's a big jump for us to go as a country overall, right, to municipally managed residential systems to this wider approach. And even though EPR is provincial jurisdiction, we're still wanting to see and needing to see some wider recycled content mandates on the national level in order to drive some of that demand that we were talking about earlier. And I'm just curious to hear maybe from Alan as a starting point, but within that systems shift that's taking place right now, what connections need to take place or gaps that groups like Circular Materials is looking to fill? I know in some of our initial discussions, we talked about things like harmonization, and I don't know if you have anything else to add to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the reason for wanting it to be at the national level and supporting at the national level is, we've had a rapid expansion of EPR across Canada over the last 5 years. But there's been a lot of benefits that I actually think support this discussion. So, for residents, there's now unified material list now in place in Ontario and Nova Scotia in December, Ontario in January. Coming up on October 1st, we're going to have a unified material list here in Alberta. and then next up, New Brunswick in June of 2027. So, the benefits are now that residents, have simpler and more consistent recycling rules, and that that they're the same across the jurisdictions. We've really reduced, confusion about recyclability, and hopefully one of the knockdown effects of that would be a reduction in contamination. It really allows for a more efficient recycling process and improves recycling performance, for all our facilities that are managing these materials. They're now getting a consistent stream, a consistent mix of materials coming to their sorting facilities. So they're not having to make adjustments based on the location of where they're receiving material. And that really helps improve and gain public confidence towards recycling through clear rules, standardized messaging, and more materials being recycled. So we really think it helps residents feel more confident the materials that they place into bins are being recovered, recycled, and taking part in the circular economy. From a producer perspective, we've done a lot of work in terms of narrowing the categories and simplifying the categories that producers are used to report on. So, late last year, we announced that in partnership with Ecological Breeze Quebec, Multi-Material Stewardship Manitoba, Sask Recycles and Recycle BC, we reached 100% alignment on harmonized producer reporting categories. That means starting next year, obligated materials will have the same reporting categories across Canada. So there'll be 62 standard reporting categories for producers. We're really excited about the benefits that will bring. We've since then moved ahead with Canada-wide eco-design guidelines. So, a lot of what we talk about here today is about how can we improve, the recycling that's taking place, and then ensuring that material can be used to, as a feedstock and as recycled content and new design or new packages. But part of the work we're doing now that we've got a stable, accepted list of materials that's virtually nationwide, really working with those same group of pros to collaborate on guidelines to help support greater recycling of packaging and paper products. So, as an example, it's great that maybe people are using as their base material, something like a PET or high density polyethylene. But if they're using the wrong label, or if they're using the wrong adhesive, it could actually be counterproductive in terms of ensuring that material can be recycled. So I think now having some work on the front end and making sure that we can help through this kind of harmonized national framework really provide clear guidance to producers on what can and can't be recycled, I think will help ensure that we've got a greater amount of material available for recycled content. So definitely we're making lots of steps in terms of making sure there's appropriate feedstock, and now we just really need to get to that next step in terms of creating the demand.
Yeah, and it's, being here and seeing this transition over the last kind of decade, and that we talked about it, it is impressive about what we've been able to achieve as an industry, as an entire, I guess, ecosystem in switching to EPR. And it's, so congratulations to the pros on some of these harmonization pieces and things. That it really is exciting from groups that are advocating for this change to be able to see some of this actually taking shape. So as much as our webinar today is about, let's talk about the hard stuff, about the challenges and all the things that we still have to fix, I just wanted to recognize it is nice to be able to see how far we've come, and really on that harmonization and that design guideline piece. Elena, your group has been very actively involved in that, and I wondered if you wanted to speak to that a bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, APR has been thrilled to be working with the producer responsibility organizations to get at that consistency on design, at least for plastic packaging. And we're pleased that all of the PROs have adopted the APR design guide for their plastics chapter, if you will, in the national guidelines that'll be coming out. So we're thrilled about that, and it's great. It's great work, and I'm definitely not challenging that good work, but it's clear that it's just not enough, right? And we need to think about how we incentivize those producers to actually buy that recycled resin. So again, there is absolutely no value in building an expensive system to collect, sort, and recycle if no one's actually using that material. And I would argue as a country, we're leading the way. We're actually, through a lot of the harmonization work the PROs are doing, we are getting to a scale of an efficient system that may be quite unique on this planet, quite frankly. So to get 3/4 of the way there and not close the loop, as we like to say, would be a real shame. And while, yes, my earlier comments focused on what policies might be important to advance, I think at its simplest level, we just need those producers to buy it, right? And so while policy is an incentivizing element of this, it is disappointing for the recyclers to see the brand owners step back from even the voluntary commitments they made. And yes, we all know the geopolitical environment has shifted, but it doesn't mean they had to step back from that. And so, and now we're hearing from producers who have done good things with their packaging. And now they're getting pushback from their own executive team saying, well, why are we doing this? There's no benefit to us doing it. It's a higher cost. There's no penalty if we don't use the recycled resin. So why are we incurring these costs to use it? And that is really hard to hear, even from these leading companies, right? So what it'll take, we have some ideas. You heard about a few. We're very much going to be engaging with finance on these concepts of tax credits to try and incentivize the demand side. We're hoping that we could see something in the upcoming budget, quite frankly. And hopefully, and this is something Matt and I have talked about as well, is even if it takes ECCC a while to get in place recycled content regulations, they still have a leadership role in the federal family to push forward the need for these other measures, right? Whether it's dealing with dumping, whether it's interim tax credits while they're getting regulations in place, or even, engaging with innovation, science, and economic development about investing in the innovative infrastructure that we need. So their work can happen in multiple ways, not just on the regulatory front, but helping to push the federal family along in their understanding of the conditions that are being faced by the sector.
I think it's important, and we see that coming through in multiple conversations that we have, to have all those players at the table, and the government, and federally as well as provincially. Matt has a big role, as Elena just said, in helping things along and creating a level playing field, and a number of those pieces. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm curious if you had anything else you wanted to add about, we come to you all the time and say, as industry, and say, we need this, we want this, we want you to do all these different tax credits or anti-dumping policies or different things like that. But what's ideal? What would you like to see from industry to get these policies right? And what's been your approach to date on that collaboration?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll just start off by saying, like, it is fair that people will come to the federal government with those types of concepts. I mean, the reality is that federally we play a very specific role because we get to see the national picture. You see from end to end of the country what's going on with various industries, and so it makes sense that we can leverage that. But I think much like for any of you that work in larger corporations, the bigger an organization gets, the more different groups have responsibilities, and you move into an enablement role or a support role or a connect the dots sort of role. And so I think for some of these big issues, I think they are definitely on the hopper, but just figuring out how best and who's best placed to manage them will be part of future conversations. To your question, though, Tammy, I think that what we're looking for really at this stage is a clear, credible data. We're already starting to collect a significant amount of it with the Federal Plastics Registry, although the annual report is still in the works for being published, and we'll start to get into more of a cyclical approach if everything goes as predicted, with a yearly report coming out to share that data with folks that have been providing their data, well, to all Canadians, but for those of you that are reporting, you'll be able to see the aggregated data in these annual reports. We're still looking for data to come from various sectors. So we want to know about the current use of post-consumer recycled content, experiences incorporating recycled content in a product, technical or safety limits, like those red lines where it's just not feasible for certain products, as well as supply constraints and market realities, because that really is going to set the stage for our policies. It'll make sure they're practical, they're targeted, and they support the real world implementation, which is really what we're looking to do as we move into 2026 and we reflect on the fact that the world has shifted so fundamentally from when some of the original concepts came out in 2023. I do think we'll get a lot of that through collaboration that the department is looking to do on these topics. But I would advise all members to continue to channel those ideas through groups like yourselves and then provide that over to the federal government. I mean, I don't have the idea right in front of me now, but I don't want to name call too much, but Julie, I think Asterix was the name that popped up with a really interesting idea on some of the kind of inversing the credits ideas. So like continue to channel those ideas to us because right now we're at the kind of policy reset stage with a goal to move sooner than later, I imagine, to support where the recycling industry needs the federal government to support. And I think what PTs are, from what I understand, are also looking for guidance from the federal lens. But we do want to make sure that we've got, a good sense of what are the ideas that are out there. What are some of the novel ideas? Maybe they will not work due to various geopolitical realities or cost realities or Canada is a large, vast country. It could be the amount of time or money or travel requirements to get things from one end to the other, but continue to share those ideas because that's really going to help shape the policy moving into 2027.
Thanks for that. And we will open it up and get to some of the questions in the chat here in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to ask a couple more questions as part of our discussion. Alan, a question for you. So we talked about companies tightening their belts, things really tough right now in terms of margins and growth and being asked to do more and more with with less and less. Can you talk about, I guess, on the producer side, if you've looked there, if if your members have looked at anything around nuanced EPR fees or recognize how fees can help it incent design change and how much is being really put into attention or how much attention is being put into that, reducing packaging, making it align with market demands, replacing it with other materials. Any of the examples of those design pieces that you might be able to speak to?
Yeah, I just highlight a couple of things. So one is it's important to remember that fees for EPR in Canada, as maybe 3-4 years ago, we're probably sitting at somewhere around $500 million a year. And by the end of 2027, they'll have risen to roughly $2.5 billion a year. So producers are definitely, the cost of EPR is having an impact on producers. So, as producers, okay, sorry, teenager, as producers, put more and more packaging in the marketplace, there's a cost to that. So I think what's become really important is that we need to be able to differentiate. And so as part of the work we've done in developing our fee categories in the 62 categories, we've started to create more differentiation between the different plastics. So for a long time, we only had one, we have number ones, number twos, and then every other plastic. So we're starting to break out plastics. So now polypropylene will have its own reporting category. Why do we do that? Because polypropylene is more and more being marketed separately as its own commodity, and it has a much higher commodity value. And so for the producers using polypropylene, when it was in the previous system, they weren't getting the full recognition, full value of the commodity value for polypropylene. And so as we go to this shift into these different categories, materials that were grouped in other plastics before but didn't generate the commodity value of polypropylene will see their costs increase, while polypropylene will get all of that value and should see its fees costs relative to those other categories start to decrease. And so I think we're trying to develop a system as a first stage where there are eco-modulated fees, but they're based on what's the actual cost of managing these different materials. So there's a whole part of our methodology that does that. And are we ensuring that each of these materials gets its commodity value? Another example would be HDP. It's long been just one standard category, HDP. It will now have a natural versus colored HDP in the future. Why? Because we know that the value gap between these two materials. So I think we've really done a lot of work on eco-modulation. From there, we think really we need to find an external source to generate more use of recycled content, because given how high the fees are right now and the further work we're doing to modulate them, we think now is a good what we're looking for is more of an external incentive to get that drive towards recycled content, because making further adjustments to our fee schedule at this juncture, given how much they've increased over the last few years and the work we've already done to modify them to more accurately reflect the cost, I think are already huge steps. And so if we can find an external incentive to get to recycled content, that's really our approach. And that's why we've talked about the federal government, and just given that this isn't a local issue in Ontario, Alberta, but something that's impacting everyone across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Cami, I
Thanks
wonder
so
if I
much.
could just add something there, because I think,
Mhm.
you know, we're talking about recycled content, and obviously the focus from a regulatory perspective has always been on packaging in these last few years. But I just put some information in the chat to share with folks about how Sweden, which at Site Zero has one of the most advanced sorting systems on this planet, quite frankly, right? Also, just yesterday, so this is hot off the press data from them, showing that of all of the material that they get recycled, we're talking plastics here, only 7% goes back into food contact approved packaging for PET bottles, PET trays, and polystyrene, 18% into other plastic packaging, 61% becomes these other plastic products, what we call downcycled often, right? The reason I put that there is it speaks to the importance of having a much broader agenda on recycled content as well. The market isn't just packaging, the market is a lot of plastic products out there. And I think this is just timely data coming out of Sweden, out of Site Zero, to show that recycled content needs to be a broader framework than we've historically talked about it in this country.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think we often have that discussion in circularity about a pop bottle becoming a pop bottle, and again, right? And the reality is that that's the ideal, but we need to live in more of the reality of the markets and the application. So thanks for sharing that, Elena. So just before I kind of pass it back to the panelists for one more kind of quick comment before I open it up to questions, we're going quickly through our time here. Matt, just curious if kind of some of the existing federal policies or things that have been put in place, like the single-use plastics ban, if you've tracked if that's led to any discernible impacts at all in the plastics market, or if there's lessons learned in that from a national policy approach that you'd apply and anything kind of new going forward.
So apologies, Tammy, the internet cut out during that, but I think I got the majority of it in terms of the kind of bottle to bottle and then the broader supper impacts. And if I missed anything, you just let me know. But so we haven't reviewed the impact of the supper directly yet. We were waiting on the Court of Appeals decision, which did come out in the federal government's favor. And so now we've been working on ensuring everyone is aware that this regulation, the single use plastic prohibition regulation, has remained in effect the entire time and continues to be in effect for the time being. What we were expecting and what the data was showing us is that we are looking to avoid about 1.3 million tons of plastic waste through the banning of the 6 single-use plastic items. When the team had done some further analysis, it equaled about 13 million garbage bags worth of plastics. So a fairly significant amount of impact is anticipated. What we've seen anecdotally from cleanup studies is that many of the shoreline cleanups are seeing that the 6 banned items have continued or have disappeared from.
Oh no,
From
Matt. Oh, you froze again. Are you still there? Okay. I think we let Matt get his connection back up. Maybe Elena and Alan, just a quick recap over to you before I go into a few questions here with the time remaining. Thank you very much for your insights and your comments today. And I guess just curious to hear from you what needs to change, what does good look like in 3 to 5 years, a couple points in closing, and then we'll go into questions. Elena, do you want to start?
I would love to see a whole of government approach on all of the issues that we've just brought up, right? Rather than a segmented approach by department. We have a circular plastics agenda as a government. enabling the outcomes that they want to see needs a whole of government approach.
Great. Thank you, Alan.
I guess what I'm excited, a lot of work's been done at the provincial level to get these programs up and running, which is fantastic. But now that they're all up and running, we virtually have national EPR by the end of next year, really starting to put more of a national lens on this, because the struggles and not so much the struggles, the challenges in each of the jurisdictions are roughly the same. And, we know that, 80% of the packaging supply to residents come from national producers, probably the top 100 producers. And so, we really need a scaled response to the challenge ahead of us, because we don't need it's not just about solving it for one jurisdiction. And so I think it's an important shift in the timing to be able to put more of a national lens and see this within that context, and coming up with solutions to get us to that next level, and ensuring that we've got sufficient demand to meet to help address or respond to all this infrastructure and capacity we built for recycling across the country, and the further capacity we need to build in the future.
Thanks. And Matt, sorry, we did lose you a bit halfway through your response, so sorry to cut you off there. Anything else to add to that initial question I asked? And then the closing question was just what does good look like for you and for the federal government in 3 to 5 years?
Almost scared to answer, because every time I've just started talking, the internet has gone unstable here. Like, I'm listening to the rest of you and it is perfect. And the questions are coming through the chat, but as soon as I talk, it starts to go. So must be my voice. I'll maybe just finish off my point real quick in terms of the broader impacts. I don't know if it came across, but some significant savings expected by 2032. Up to 13 million garbage bags worth of plastic expected to be eliminated. We'll have more once the supper has been in full effect for a little while and we go in to explore the actual counts from it. But we have seen anecdotally from litter cleanups some significant shifts away from the 6 banned items. And we are continuing to see growth in the plastics industry. I think recently I saw some numbers that were showing like the plastic production industry has grown by about $9 billion in the last decade, even with the supper in full effect. So we are continuing to see plastic use in Canada, and room for plastics to grow in Canada, however we end up using them. But making sure that we can remove the most problematic ones that have good alternatives and don't have great, maybe potentially recycling solutions or recyclability or design solutions, et cetera, et cetera. So for the next 3 to 5 years, I mean, I do think I agree with Elena and Alan. I mean, I do see a world where some sort of a national approach is in play. I think recycled content mandates are probably the most elegant solution to parts of this problem. I think what I see in 3 to 5 years is hopefully requirements in place that balance between regulations that are realistic alongside regulations that grow towards ambition, giving people the ability to get to where we need to go while putting in some protectors for the recycling industry so that we can help stabilize some of these end markets. Now, I don't think that means that there are not voluntary initiatives, there's not industry-led initiatives, there's not recycling-led initiatives, there's not discussions on tax incentives or anti-dumping policies. Like, I think all of these need to coalesce and dovetail together to create that stability. I don't think recycled content mandates will be the sole solution for it. And I think recycled content policy has to go beyond that. So I think there's probably a role for all of us leveraging. I mean, Alan spoke to it very, very well in terms of how the pros have come together on the definitions and have found ways to harmonize definitions so effectively without the need for any sort of federal intervention to set the stage for that. So like, I think if we can all find our places, work together, I think that will, in the next 3 to 5 years, I think I can foresee a future where that is what it looks like.
Thank you so much. And sorry to everyone on the call for leaving such a short amount of time for questions. It's hard when we have such a riveting discussion going on. And I see a few that have come in the chat. So if we don't get to them, we will respond after as a follow-up in this recording, and some of the slides will be available. Just really rapid fire. I know this came up during the chat, but just back to Jill's question on, has anyone ever suggested a penalty for using virgin plastic when PCR is available and not being used? Elena, you unmuted. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant about a penalty approach on a sector, quite frankly, that is so fundamental to more than just packaging. It's in every aspect of our life, right? So it would make our computers more expensive. It would make our fridges more expensive, wherever plastic is used, which is pretty much everywhere. And so we have to think really carefully about these types of penalties. We have seen Europe try and introduce virgin plastic use penalties, and I am not sure it's had the impact they thought it was going to have. So probably good to look at some lessons around the world of whether that's a workable strategy or not.
Thanks for that. We had one question just about providing links to websites that show market value performance. I know there's a few, and I know most of them are subscription based. I'll follow up with this group offline. If there's any that we can share with you, we will do so in the follow-up notes. One of the questions that came through from Andrea Jones, we may have to follow up on this one as we don't have any virgin resin manufacturers on our panel today, but the question is, how much is the price of virgin plastics attributable to transport and importation costs versus extraction and production? And that's a very, very good question. I'll open it up to the panel if anyone thinks they can answer it. Otherwise, we'll try to follow up with that after the call. Okay, that's what I thought. I was looking at it going, you know what? I'll ask it anyway. Elena, thanks for sharing that information from Sweden. Rose, thanks for reaching out. We will definitely share the contact information as long as we get permission from the panelists. Thanks, Jewel, for sharing your link there and some resources as well. And yeah, with that, I think we've come to the end of our questions and really appreciate everyone for your participation today. We will circle back, as I said, with the recording of the webinar and with some of the links and pieces, contact information and things like that. And, really want to take the time just to reflect on this discussion. I always really enjoy coming together with a group like this, where we have multiple industry perspectives, government and different players involved, because I think as we summarize there, that that collaboration is very needed, both in smaller jurisdictions provincially as well as nationally. So we appreciate all of you operating in those spaces and being able to contribute and share your experiences with us. I think we've determined that collection alone is not sufficient. We need that demand. We need that harmonization. We need that policy certainty from government, and everyone's doing a lot, and we have made a lot of improvements in the last few years to a massive systems change that we're working with. So we'll continue to work on this problem and the opportunities that exist with it as well. And thanks everyone for your questions and participation. And again, to our great panelists and to the RCA and APR for co-hosting this event. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.